Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. My name is David Higgins. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. This is going to be a fun conversation, and so many times I'm getting questions about the business side of nonprofits, especially from those that are founders. I remember when I founded my first nonprofit, I was so green. I thought I knew everything and I knew nothing. Me and a group of musicians, singers put together, I was 19 years old. I was the youngest in the crowd, but the five of us started our first nonprofit. And let's say it lasted a year. And we learned a lot about what we didn't know. And I'm hoping this conversation is going to really help you in your launching of your nonprofit. If you have already launched your nonprofit, this might still be a good conversation for you to listen into because there might be notes to take and go, oh, we need to start doing that as well. So if you probably have gotten kind of the drift of where we're going today in this podcast, running a nonprofit on the business side, the boardroom side, on the financial side is eerily similar to being an entrepreneur and starting a business. It takes some of the exact same acumen. It takes some of the same understanding of finance and a flow through and where income is coming and going. And so a lot of us get into the nonprofit world because we have a passion for the people or the cause that we're going after. But we forget that passion doesn't feed us and passion doesn't pay the bills. There's a whole nother side of business that we must become attuned to. So I'm really hoping this conversation is going to strengthen you in your ability to be a champion in the nonprofit that you are launching. This podcast is brought to you today by the book Demystifying Fundraising Funnels. It is a digital marketing blueprint to fund your nonprofit. If you are at that point of beginning your nonprofit and you're saying, David, we're needing to start doing some fundraising, or we just started and we're needing to increase what that looks like. We have to understand that today's digital marketing tools that we've been given are there to accent and multiply what we're already doing on the ground. So if you're already doing, let's take the most basic of the smallest of fundraisers, a car wash. If you turn that car wash and you start using online tools, you can magnify the results of that car wash from a $300 to $500 car wash to the $3,000 to $5,000 car wash, just by understanding that there are tools online that we can use. And we can do that all across the board. We spoke to a nonprofit this last year who could not do their dinner. That was their main fundraiser of the year, and they needed to bring in just under $1 million for gross to be able to maintain their care for the people they're caring for the next year. When they took it online with only 9 weeks to go and did an e-dinner using webinar tools, suddenly they were able to free up of a lot of their focus on just trying to put on the dinner, and they multiplied the results of the income. They brought in more money during COVID, not being able to do their dinner, than they had any year previously. And that's exciting what can happen if we already take what's working, we can 10x it by using the right digital marketing tools. And so that's what this book does for you. It really helps you see what's possible by the combining of what you're doing with what you can do. So I encourage you to pick that up wherever books are sold, Audible, as well as Amazon and Target. And you can be able to find that book, read it, enjoy it. If you have any questions, give us a call. All right. So you have been dreaming of successfully launching your nonprofit. You want to start a nonprofit? And I hope you're ready to listen, because I think your perception of what is possible is going to actually grow. You're going to see that there is things that you can put into place that's going to really increase your long-term viability of your organization. Our guest today is the founder of a company called 31 Startups. It stands by its name. He is the master of being able to move from conception to launch in 31 days and then shift that launch to cash flow positive in 90 days. Imagine you having a dream, a passion. You're saying, David, how do I take this and make it real? Did you realize in 4 months that can be a reality? So pay attention. Listen real close to what we're going to talk about today. He is the co-founder and startup of Radio Network. He has been CEO, president of an advertising agency with clients such as P&G, Nextel, Disney, and Outpost.com. Today, he's going to help us outline what I call the nonprofit's founder's dream, how to go from launch to profitability within 90 days. Let's welcome Mark Grimes to the Nonprofit Podcast. Mark, thank you so much for being with us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me here. It's fun to be on this side of the screen.
Yeah, I realize that you are a veteran of the podcast world. I'm so glad that you're willing to hang out with us newbies.
Absolutely. Well, you're 34 in. You're far from a newbie, but you're doing great. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. I see you graduated as a duck from University of Oregon. Is that right?
I did many ages ago.
Have you been in Oregon your whole life?
I moved down in middle school with my family from Seattle. So moved down here after my wife and I got married in the early 80s. We thought we were going to end up in LA. And then we had kids and realized there's no way we're going to want to raise kids in LA. So we stayed in Portland, which has been great. Love
So you
Portland.
officially have moss behind the ears then.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. Moss, and I've got, slugs for pets.
Michelle and I spent a couple years in Vancouver, right across the river.
Yeah.
It's amazing that the microclimate that region of the country has,
Yep.
outside of everything else around it. It's going to be a very nice place to live, especially in the spring and summer.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
Well, I think it's fascinating what you've done. You've already launched 31 separate companies. Is the number still 31, or has it grown now?
Okay. How do we go into that one? So it hasn't grown. It's the difference. So in the time I've been building companies since 1989, every company I've built's been cash flow positive in 90 days or less, and that usually means that it's got enough revenue. I can pull out somewhere between 5 and 10,000 a month by the third month, by the 90th, the 90 days. And people have, how do you do that? Oh yeah, it's like, here's the secret recipe, right? And so and over the years, because I'm kind of a, maybe probably have entrepreneurial ADD, I've got like 400 or 500 ideas written down. Oh, this is a good idea. And so write it down, write it down, write it down. So I decided during COVID, after talking to my wife, that it's like, well, what if I tried 31 in 30 days? She's like, really? I'm like, whatever. I'm not going downtown. I'm not going to the office. I'm not going to our co-working space. Why not? So it's like, well, let's give it a shot. So we basically launched the 31 companies in 31 days. And then the reality set in. And the reality was, we got two of the 31 to revenue, so to speak, right? In the time frame. What I learned for the first time, and even at my age, absolutely can learn, because I by no means know it all. What I learned was you can't get 31 things to 10 or 20 grand or whatever it is in revenue in that time frame, because the second you're trying to focus on one, you feel 30 things pulling at you over here. So it became, for me, the real learning in that became about why one of the reasons it's possible is focus. And you can't focus on 31 things at the same time. Now, as well as I do, with what you've started and the things you've done, well, but even when you're the founder, the CEO, the president of the company, well, you've still got a to-do list of 100 things. But
Yeah.
it's 100 things with a singular focus overall, rather than 31 things with 100 things each and 3,100 things. And it was fun, but at the end of the day, not really anything I don't think that other people could learn from, per se.
Yeah.
If that sounds.
I tell my children that they didn't give me this gray hair. The business and nonprofit world gave it to me.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, you have a real strength in advertising and marketing, and have launched a number of companies that lean on that niche. What has been your favorite sector that you've built in, though?
That's a good question. And I think when I look at what the things that I've built over the years and the companies that I've helped build with other founders, other entrepreneurs, and business owners, the thing that appeals to me the most is things so it's not really a sector as much as it is things that are new and have never been done before. So it's unexplored territories. Like when I built Arts Marketing Association, there wasn't an association for marketing directors of nonprofits. I didn't know if it was going to work. When I built Ice Cream Interactive, which was the online advertising agency, that was in 96, 97. I mean, people weren't even, I mean, people were on the web, but it was just starting out. So even though I said, I'm going to build an online advertising agency, nobody knew what it meant. I didn't know what it meant either. I had to figure out what that was going to mean. And then the same with Ned Space, which is a co-working space that I started 12 years ago. Well, nowadays everybody knows what co-working was. 12 years ago, I had to explain it to everybody. So, the sector is, yeah, and you can't really count. I don't know. New things isn't really a sector, but that's kind of the way that I would call it. That's what I count it.
So you did mention the Foundation for Arts Marketing
Yeah,
Association.
yeah,
You've put your toe into the nonprofit sector. You understand a lot of the pressure that's within that sector.
yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your journey when you're founding the Arts Marketing
Sure,
Association?
sure, absolutely. So I was in my mid 20s when that started. And in my early 20s, I had been the marketing director of two different nonprofit theaters here in Portland. One was called Portland Repertory Theater. The other was called Storefront Theater. The first one was pretty conservative, did a lot of, you know, old comedies, kind of old standards, Noel Coward, that kind of thing. The Storefront Theater was kind of a counterculture theater. They did very interesting things, 60s theater and kind of more avant-garde and that kind of thing. Uh, Portland Repertory Theater, uh, we grew them from 500 annual subscribers to over 3,000 in 2.5 to 3 years. And then Storefront Theater went from 100 subscribers, annual subscribers, paying subscribers, to over 7,000. So, you know, the board, everybody was thrilled. It was good. But what was frustrating to me or opened my eyes or whatever you want to call it was, as somebody in my 20s at the time, was like, why aren't other people doing this, right? In other words, I was focused on, hey, here's this live theater experience, hey, you should come buy a subscription, basically building a whole marketing program around what it was they did. And I became kind of frustrated that other nonprofits not only weren't doing it, especially theaters or performing arts companies weren't doing it, but a lot of what was happening was people would come in, like myself, young, they'd learn something in 2 or 3 or 4 years or whatever, and then they'd move out of the nonprofit sector. Okay. And because of their age and a lot of other things, the new person would then come in. There'd be no historical information as to what to do. So they'd have to reinvent the wheel. And then they'd leave after 2 or 3 years. So I really wanted to build something that would create a kind of a culture of information where people would share a newsletter, some consulting, some phone calls with people that would then build a base so people could really get into building their earned income revenue streams, and have a base in which to do it so they could then, it would be left there after whoever the marketing director goes on to their next position.
So, with your experience, I want you to take me to school. All right.
Sure, sure.
So, if I'm getting a little bit of my background in my mid 20s, the mid 90s, early 90s, and I had just gotten engaged to Michelle, and I knew construction. This is one of the I was a musician that knew
Right.
construction, and I started my own finished carpentry business because I love doors, windows,
Right.
molding. I love the detail orientation of that.
Yeah.
And I was doing that during the day. And in the evenings, Michelle and I started working with a lot of the inner city areas
Mm.
where we're living. And I applied for a $90,000 grant in 1994. It was a pretty
Wow.
big grant,
Yeah, yeah.
and was able to get it to start a inner city youth center. And we put it right on the street that bordered the Crips on one side, the
Okay.
Bloods on the other side, and behind us was the Tijuana Mafia.
Wow.
And it became, it became kind of our passion project for that
Sure.
season. I had learned a little bit more about business, but certainly not enough.
Right.
There's 100 little details that I hadn't quite figured out yet.
Sure.
And I was getting really driven by the passion what we're doing instead of keeping one eye as a leader on some of the
Right.
fundamentals.
Yep.
Can I ask, if I was going to do it all over again and you're my coach,
Right.
what are the fundamentals I would need to meet your criteria for a launch?
Sure.
And putting both business and nonprofit launch
Sure.
in the exact same fundamental category.
As I think they should be, frankly. I mean, businesses are nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. That's part of the challenge with nonprofits is some people assume, kind of like social enterprises or social entrepreneurs, oh, it's going to make the world a better place. The money will show up. No, it won't. Um, so to answer your first question, David, I think so. If I'm sitting down with a first time founder, whether it's of a nonprofit or a startup or whatever, my first thing is always I'm going to give you the best advice I possibly can. This comes from whatever, too many decades of, of my experience, what I've seen, what I've tried, what I failed at, what I've seen others do. However, everything I'm telling you might be totally wrong. That's where I want to start. It might be wrong, right? You need to figure it out. Part of the problem is when you talk to people that whether they've done it before or they're advisors or all these other things, is you get what I call kind of mentor whiplash. You ask five people for for information on something, you're going to get five different answers. Sometimes they're polar opposites. So it might be wrong. I don't think it is, but it might be. um, so the first thing I would have probably asked you, whether it's like that one specifically, or like the first one you talked about that you started with the five people, the five board members of the other nonprofit. My first thing would be, oh my God, five people is insane. It's like everybody has different levels of commitment. Not everybody's going to be working on this 40 hours a week, let alone 20. It's really hard to come to a consensus. It's one thing when you have one or two people and then there's a board, that's a whole different animal. So what I'd ask you in that scenario would have asked you is, um, you know, how are you going to measure your success in 90 days and 1 year and 5 years? And I'd look to what that answer is, because a lot of times, and again, the nonprofit and social enterprise world, people are talking about their amazing results of building the world a better place, which I agree with 100%. But what they're not talking about is the day to day management and running of the business, the operations. And even if they're talking about the business and the operations and those kinds of details, the thing that a lot of people overlook out of inexperience oftentimes is, how does it make money? What's the revenue look like? How are you going to get to it? And, one of the things I'll have somebody do usually pretty early on too is, look at your calendar, whether it's on your phone or a physical calendar or whatever too, but look at your calendar for the last week or two. Look at it and you circle the items that at the end of that meeting or phone call or whatever, but at the end of it, is there the chance you'll get some money, some revenue? And oftentimes what I'll see is people looking at their calendars and it's like, they'll look at the last 2 weeks or the last month and it's like, wow, none of these meetings really were going to end in revenue. So I think that's an important thing for any new founder, to really consider as early as possible.
I feel that one of the biggest mistakes we make as new passionate founders of our nonprofits, because we're consumed by the concern that drove us to this particular place, is we feel like the money will follow the passion. And it doesn't work that way. No matter how much you want it to work that way, the money doesn't follow the passion. You have to go after the money so you can afford the passion. There's a reverse psychology that nonprofit leaders and founders fight against especially in the small scale.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you get in a big scale and you have somebody who's going to invest, 1.5 million in the launch of your nonprofit, because
Right.
that person, they're going to have support system that's going to help secure that success. But that's only really the few percentage points of launching nonprofits. Majority of them is a guy and his girlfriend and his buddy. They see a need and they throw themselves at it. Rescuing the animals, taking care of, a region environmentally or pursuing some kind of civil care.
Yeah.
And their passion for that, they feel like everyone's going to see what I see and they're going to want to support us.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen that way.
That's you got it. You said it. I mean, that's it. That's exactly what it is. I mean, there's this assumption of I'm going to do good in the world. Wow, everybody's supportive of that. The money's going to be there. It's like no, it's not going to be there. We started back in 07, 08, we did an event called Maker Fair Africa. We wanted to do it in Ghana first, in Accra. This was with 3 other partners at the time. None of the 4 of us had ever met face to face. We met online. We met on social media, and then started some private conversations. This was before, barely, but this was kind of before Facebook even too. Started weekly phone calls, did all this, and we decided, this is kind of a starting up story, I guess too, but we decided that we weren't going to form a new entity, which is another thing I recommend to startup founders too, because 50C3s are a pain in the butt. Do a thing as a underneath another nonprofit to prove the model first. So what we decided is like, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's our 1-pager on it. We're not going to write a business plan or all this other stuff. We want to put together an event. We want to find some of the best innovators and technologies and startup ideas in Africa and the whole continent. Pay to have a lot of them come there to show their stuff, and then a lot of local people too. We wanted to have local Africans come and see what was happening as part of like a fair, but we didn't want to charge ticket prices, and we weren't going to get money ourselves. So we put the idea out there, and sure enough, people started showing up going, we had a friend at the time, but from MIT, that said, oh, if you guys can make this happen, if you can raise, I can't remember what it was exactly, but like, if you can raise 20,000, we'll match 20,000. It's like, oh, the gauntlet's been thrown, right? So that's what we did. That's what we made happen. The second year after that, and when we did a press conference in Accra, we did it at the British consulate or something like that. They had this thing set up with all this food. They had, I don't know, 100 chairs, 75 chairs set up. We walked in like a half hour before. We're like, oh, this is going to be embarrassing. It's going to be the 4 of us sitting up there. There's going to be 5 people sitting in the front row. And it's like, this is going to be horrible. And lo and behold, now keep in mind, I'm born in Seattle, raised in Portland. These other, all these other guys were all from different African countries. A couple from Ghana, one from Sudan, one from Nairobi. It was packed. It was standing room only. And at first, the first few questions were a little like, what, kind of, what's your angle here? You people from the US, and once they understood what we were doing, that it's like, hey, this is all about a focus on Africa and what everybody else is doing. We're just helping coordinate the thing. It's not about us. We're not pulling out a dime. No one's making money, et cetera, et cetera. We were told the thing would last 20 minutes, and it went about an hour and a half because they were thrilled. They were so excited to see what was happening. Anyway, flip ahead, and the year later, Rockefeller Foundation came to us to see how they could help fund us for 3 years.
Wow.
We didn't go to them. I mean, obviously aware of them, but we didn't go to them. Somewhat similar story that might as well kind of paste on right here too. Years ago, I was in a meeting with the executive director of Outside In Portland. And for your listeners, your viewers, Outside In helps homeless youth here in Portland. It's been around for decades. Anyway, I was in a meeting with her. We were just kind of casually BSing back and forth. She was opening mail. How important I was. But anyway, she was opening mail. She had an envelope there from the Gates Foundation. Now, they had not written a grant or reached out to the Gates Foundation at all. She opened up the envelope, pulled out a check for $1 million. No other paperwork, nothing. A check payable to Outside In for $1 million.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, I wanted to jump up and down, right? It's like, wow, that's awesome. So what I think, again, the money that's out there, whether it's foundations or granting agencies or people that want to go and become members of things, it is out there, but you need to show your results, see what's happening. You become, what I kind of call be the magnet, which is kind of like, your book, kind of like the funnel, be the magnet, build this interesting thing and have people come to you and then figure out ways to make it work. And so many founders, and I do this myself sometimes too. I get so caught up in, I think I have the right idea, but it's like, oh, shoot. But if I don't talk to enough people, they can help tweak it and make it a lot better idea. But if I'm trying to just push my thing and my idea, it's like, it's really important to save these elephants or do this thing. It's like, but if you're talking to the wrong people that don't care, you're not hitting your audience.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to back this up just a little bit.
Sure,
I'm going to make
sure.
sure I got these
Yeah,
down right.
yeah,
So, first thing, we'll start off with a smaller board. I think the smallest you can go is three. Three is
yeah.
good. The last nonprofit I started was with three
Nice.
people, and I waited till I had a certain amount of momentum before I started adding key people that actually brought something to the team other than their smarts. Like
Perfect.
they brought in income, they brought in other donations and
Right.
relationships and network to that board. The second thing was how to measure yourself in 90 days and 5 years and create the statistics so you know where you're what you need to make in 90 days, where you need to be in 5 years.
Yeah,
Number three, look at the last week on your calendar and see what you're doing to actually create money,
yeah.
because money is not going to follow your passion. You need to create the money so you can pursue your passion, and that's really great. Is there a fourth one I could add to that list?
I mean, I would just say it's a little more esoteric, but know what it is that's driving you to want to do or build that thing.
Your why.
Your why. Yeah, yeah. Know what that is. Um, because that's important to you telling your story to other people. And it's also important to know to help guide the thing that you want to build. I don't know if you've ever read, there's an amazing book out there by Paul Pollock called Out of Poverty. And, remember reading it when it first came out, and first chapter two came to a number, and it was just like, oh man, there are 500 million farmers in the world that it's like that are like 5 hectares or whatever it is, 5 acres maybe and under. But I had to read. It's like I was like, oh, 500,000. No, 500 million, half a billion out of 7 billion people. So what he focused on, rightfully so, was poor farmers and how can his nonprofit and his organization help these founders um, uh, uh, add another crop in between their existing crop that's more lucrative? Can they squeeze out another crop? What can they do to basically create more income for their families and themselves? His other thing that that I loved that he did too was if you launch and start a thing, if you can't get it to help, and then he thinks in a whole different way. Your thought he's passed a few years ago, but anyway, if he couldn't get it to help 1 million people in 3 years, he didn't want to do it. Now I realize
Wow.
that's pretty big thinking. I get that, and that's not going to work if you're doing something real local or regional in Yakima or Portland or whatever. But for those that are really looking for the impact, I think, what a great filter that was.
No, I totally hear that, and but you need to know what your limitations are, but also need to know what your strengths are, so you can see where you can push through.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the educational musts you have to have in your back pocket as a wannabe founder? Because passion doesn't do it on its own.
Yeah, passion doesn't do. Oh, yeah, passion.
I can tell you from personal experience.
Yeah, yeah, that can actually, because then you feel like you really have this kind of that you're doing the right thing, and you might not be. So you're right, passion can actually sometimes be a little bit of a side street that you might not take. I mean, it's funny because I think entrepreneurship, while you can learn about it, and I'm still learning. I've been doing this since forever, right? So I'm still learning. So constantly learning. But the other thing, so I think education's okay, but I think the one thing that some people can kind of hold back on or whatever too, but is They need to have a bias towards action. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the action. I'm not going to write about it. I'm not going to do a report. I'm not going to read reports for months and months and months. I'm not going to build a business plan for how many people. I met so many people, not a lot, but people, it's like they've been working on a business plan for maybe 2 or 3 years. And it's like, oh man. And when I tell them that I've never written a business plan and I've never raised $1 in funding, they're like, hold it, that doesn't compute, right, in their head. So a bias towards action, I think, is a huge thing, nonprofit, for profit, whatever, because that's where you're going to get stuff done. And they'd rather get it done and be 80% of the way there, or even 55%, and then tweak it, rather than worrying about, I need to get it so it's 98%. And even then, I'm not sure, et cetera, et cetera. So bias towards action.
I like that, bias towards action. That could make a really good T-shirt. And so there is that place where uh, when you're just talking about that, I remember the first time I was on a board that wasn't my own. I was
Right.
28 years old. By the time I was in my mid 30s, I was on 6 boards. It was too
Wow.
much. But
Yeah,
at the time, I thought it was like, hey, everybody wants me on their board. This is great. I'm
right,
learning something. I have a
right.
value. But my very first time, I came into this room, and I was literally 30 years younger than everybody else on the board. And that's part of the reason why they brought me in. They're
Sure.
looking at rejuvenating the nonprofit in that
Right.
way. But I remember the very first conversation that was happening, the board had to do with finances. And I, being young, said, you know what? We can do this. Let's just plan on the money being there because we need to go out and do it. And this guy, Don Buckle, I still remember him. He was a good friend of my father's. He
Yeah.
leans across the table. He says, David, you don't look at finances on a board with faith. You do it with dollars, cents, and what's in the bank. And I'm like, and I didn't believe him at first. I'm like, yeah, but we're doing something so good.
Right.
And by the time I got to my mid 30s, I was right where he is. Whether you consider yourself a person of faith or not, that has nothing to do with the way you look at finances. We all, when we've got enough hopes and dreams, can say, we're just going to believe the money's going to be there
Right.
because what we're doing is really good.
Right.
But when it comes to dollars and cents, when it comes to the finances, we
Yeah.
cannot allow faith to be our deciding factor when it comes to what we're doing.
Right.
And for that, it's faith that causes us to forgive ourselves for bad decisions because, like, we'll be okay.
Right.
But when we have a bias towards action, like you're saying,
Right.
we suddenly realize, okay, actually, what I'm doing is harming our institution, even though it's done with the right intention.
Right.
I need to really get myself back on as a leader on the funding bandwagon so
Right.
that I am actually creating future possibilities for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. That's great.
Well, as you look at the next few years, where do you see the best return on investment with a nonprofit's advertising dollar? Because advertising has really been something you've been a kingpin in for quite some time.
Right.
If a nonprofit says, look, we have a budget, it may not be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's 30,000, it's $60,000, or a limited amount that we can put towards marketing.
Right.
Where do you think the best return on investment in the next few years is going to be?
Sure. I'm going to give a kind of a specific answer and then a broad one, or a broad one first. And the broad one first kind of becomes more looking at how you use new technology to further your nonprofit can be a huge advantage, right? So, like, so much of this is a little hard kind of in the rearview mirror, but when you look at Twitter, when Twitter first came out and people were taking pictures of their breakfasts and nobody gave a shit, pardon the language, people, bleep that out. Anyway, is like Tony Hsieh with Zappos started, he basically killed company email for Zappos, the shoe company, and all his team members had Twitter accounts and they talked to each other openly on Twitter. And Zappos, blew up and it was like a whatever it was, a 500 million billion-dollar acquisition. So he used Twitter in a way that now, if somebody went to use it, it just isn't going to work like that. So if you can use, whether it's TikTok or NFTs or DAOs or all this other stuff, if you can figure out a way, Web3, if you can figure out a way to use these new technologies in interesting ways for your organization, that so I'm not giving you a specific answer there, but I'm giving you kind of this broad answer of looking at the new technology, figure out ways to use it, assuming that the audience for your nonprofit, would kind of buy into that. That's the one answer. The other answer is what you're putting the money into. If it's building your community, whatever that source is that you're putting the ad money or the marketing money into, if it's building your community, if you go from a community of 100 people to 500 people, that's incredible. So building the community as an outcome is really important. And when you know the value of that, this is granted my old advertising days, I guess, too, but when you know the value of that, if you know you spend $1 bringing a community member, but every new community member means $7, really? If you look at that, like some marketing directors do, you have an unlimited advertising budget, right? So if one brings in 7, well, okay, you know, give me $1.
Comes down to your cost of acquisition then.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 7 back. It's like, are you going to stop doing that? It's like, well, why would you? So part of it's the limiting belief that you only have a $50,000 advertising budget, but if 50 brings you back 350 grand, keep going, keep spending. As long as the operations aren't harmed by bringing in that many new clients or customers or community members or whatever.
Mm, very good. When you are looking what's next down the road for you in 31, what do you think is the next challenge in front of you?
The next thing for me really right now is, I sold my co-working space last March after having almost sold it in January of 2020. And then March happened of 2020. And I'm like, oh my God, we're not even going to make it to the end of the year. But we did. And so I sold it, very happy to pass it on to somebody who's really sharp to take that forward. I really want whatever the next thing or combination of things that I'm building or doing, I really want to make sure that it measurably makes the world a better place. So whatever the thing is just a vehicle to what I think for me is going to be to support multiple sustainable development goals, SDGs. So, poverty and clean water and children's education and all this, whatever it is I can build, kind of like the Paul Pollock thing in a way too, I guess too, but it kind of scales upwards, kind of an upward spiral. So whatever, I want to build something that can kind of continue on and on, even if I'm not necessarily actively, putting in 40, 50, 60 hours a week or whatever.
I uh, I wish you the best. It sounds like you're moving towards a beach in Boca Raton, and I'm still hoping to the day that I'm not putting in 50, 60 hours a week. That would be great. One day that'll come to me.
Yeah,
We end every single one of our shows, and this has been a fantastic conversation, but we do have to bring it to an end at some point in time.
sure.
And we do a shout out to nonprofits, and there's so many amazing nonprofits out there that are just working in the shadows and doing a great job. And so I'm going to go first.
Okay.
And do you have a nonprofit ready? You can give a shout out to.
I'll wait my turn, but I got something.
Awesome, that's great. So after doing hours of research in Charity Navigator, we decided that Child Foundation would be the best way for us to sponsor children
Hmm.
around the world. This is a direct quote from a organization that does nothing but find nonprofits that are worthy of putting their money in.
Hmm.
Somebody else also said about this particular nonprofit, the best charity to work for in order to help children in need. A third one said, I have a great experience with them over 2 years now. And Charity Navigator is one of my most trusted sources to find the
Hmm.
really the transparency and the honesty of a nonprofit towards their finances and their mission. And they gave them a 2 thumbs up exceptional rating. And the name of this organization is called Child Foundation. It is an international charity organization that helps children living in poverty remain in school. The
Hmm.
children sponsored through their programs are in great financial need, and many of the children They assist our orphans or children living in emergency situations. By enhancing the quality of life for the children as well as their respective families, they actively help them gain access to education. And their URL is childfoundation.org. And according to the many people that left them great reviews, as well as what Charity Navigator says about them, I want to thank them that they're doing a great job. And if anyone ever from that organization gets to hear this podcast and hear this, I want to tell you guys, you're running a great nonprofit, a great organization, and doing a great service to the next generation. So thank you for
Nice.
what you're doing. And it's your turn.
Cool. Okay.
Mark,
Well,
who you pick?
I'm gonna do what startup founders do sometimes, and I'm gonna break the rule. So I'm gonna give you two quick ones instead of one, if that's okay.
Oh my.
No, no, not two. I could probably go on, but I'll do two of my favorites. One, you probably are familiar with both of them too, but one of them is from Portland, and it's called the Duggy Center. And
Yes.
yeah, the Duggy Center, one of the first of its kind in the world. I think it still is. The Duggy Center is for grieving children. And they really have it slotted out where there's grieving children that have lost parents, those that have lost siblings and family members, those that have had incidents of violence or suicide. So, and they really, each of them is a different type, obviously, of grieving. And having sat in some of the meetings and helped them with some fundraising approaches and stuff in the past, um, it's really hard subject matter, and it's stuff, you know, um, when you have kids that have dealt with this and hearing them talking about it is really, really gut wrenching. It's really hard. But it's also critically important. And I've seen it's funny, well, funny, not funny at all. But over the years, I've seen, the Duggy Center now goes in when there are school shootings, and they go in and they know how to kind of coordinate and bring in the students and help them kind of deal with what they've just, some degree of what they just lived through. So I think the Duggy Center, which is named after this little kid called Dougie that passed away, and he was like positive attitude up until the end, just this smart, cute, wonderful little kid. And so the Duggy Center would be number one. Number two for me just has to be Kiva. Kiva is microfinance, but it's microfinance for us, right? Not for people that are banks or have billions of dollars or millions of dollars. It's microfinance. I was meeting with a social entrepreneur from Uganda, and we were this would have been years ago, but we were kind of brainstorming what microfinance for the masses could be. And we were in this kind of pseudo private online community, and all of a sudden, the two of the three members that founded Kiva were in this community, and we're like, "Oh man, somebody's doing it!" Which to me was like, "What a relief! We don't have to do it now; they're doing it." So, over the past whatever it's been now, 12 or more years, I've supported over 8,000 women entrepreneurs, primarily in developing countries. And it's so satisfying to be able to do something like that. Kiva went in and kind of upended, a lot of local money lenders that did microfinance would charge 300 to 500% interest, which is pretty exorbitant. Now you have to charge some interest, even on small loans, just to keep the business going because it's a real business. But they work with money lenders and microfinance organizations that charge like 25 or 35%, which seems high by first world U.S. standards, but in reality, when you're making $100 or $200 or $500 loans, you need to have some meat on the bone to be able to pay local staff. So anyway, Kiva and Duggy Center.
Wow. That's fantastic. Mark, I know you and I connected first on LinkedIn. If somebody wanted to reach out with a question, what's the best way for them to connect to you?
They can always reach out on LinkedIn, just Mark Grimes, Portland, Oregon, but probably the best way is Twitter. And Twitter, and my handle is Mark Grimes, just my name on Twitter. I'm wide open to questions in the open is fine, and I'm also open to receiving private messages if people don't want to ask stuff private, if they want to ask things privately.
Mark, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Man, it's been great talking to you.
Cool. Well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me here. Leave listeners and viewers with one other thing. Buy David's book, because ultimately, you need to know how to do the marketing and advertising and setting up the proper funnel and doing as much of that as you can ahead of time. is going to save yourself a lot of pain. So get it, learn it, practice it. It's not going to be perfect on day one, and it's not going to be perfect on day 700 either. You're always going to make it better, but that's going to be a great starting point. So, and thanks again for having me here.
Well, Mark, thank you for that shout out too on the book. I have to agree with you. Buy the book. But for those of you that are working so hard to build your nonprofits, to found something that you see is desperately needed in society, I want to tell you we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much for the job you're doing, for the passion you're throwing in, your love towards the community that you're in. And until we talk here in another few days, you take care, be safe, and we'll speak soon. Bye now.